Today we're looking at a pre-built. This is the Ultra R77 RTX from CyberPowerPC. This thing's packing, among other things, a Ryzen 7 7800X 3D and an RTX 4080 Super. So let's put this thing through its paces, see how it fares through my usual benchmarks and usual list of 10 games, and see how we come out on the other side. Let's dive in. Hi guys, I'm Matt and welcome to Kit Guru. So then, the Ultra R77 RTX pre-built desktop. It's not the catchiest naming I've ever come across, but that's kind of besides the point. I guess naming doesn't equal more FPS, thankfully. If you choose to pick one of these systems up, it'll cost you a few pennies under £2,300. Included in that price, you get CyberPowerPC's Gold Tier 5-year limited warranty, which will cover you with 2 years parts cover, 5 years labour cover, and 2 years of free shipping if you ever need to send anything back for repair or replacement, which is a good bit of peace of mind included in the price. The spec that you'll get for your 2,300 hard-earned pounds is as follows. The CPU is the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D, probably the best pound for pound gaming CPU that you can get right now. It's got 8 cores and 16 threads running at a base clock of 4.2 GHz with a max boost clock of up to 5 GHz. And of course, it's got AMD's 3D V-cache memory in there to help stabilize 1% lows and boost frame rates a little bit. That processor is sitting inside of an MSI MAG B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi ATX motherboard, which has got the following specs. It's got onboard Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3. It's got 3 M.2 slots for storage. Only one of them is populated, so there's room for expansion. It's got 4 DDR5 DIMM slots supporting up to a total of 256 gigabytes of memory. It's got decent rear I/O. It's got HD audio and SPDIF optical audio connections, 4 USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A ports, 2 USB 2.0 ports, 3 USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A ports, a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C port, a 2.5 gigabit LAN port, and then a single DisplayPort 1.4 and HDMI 2.1 port. And then finally, it's got BIOS flashback as well if you ever need to update the BIOS if your CPU breaks or you upgrade to one that isn't supported on your current BIOS. Moving on to talk about the graphics card then, and it's an NVIDIA RTX 4080 Super. The specific model in this system is the MSI Gaming X Slim, but looking at the spec list on CyberPower's website, no specific model is mentioned. So it may be a case of you'll get whatever 4080 Super that they've got available at the time of ordering. Although you can choose a specific model if you want a certain card when you order the system. As you can with most of the parts, you can spec and tweak to your heart's content. But if you order one as it comes, that's the one that I got in this review system. The 4080 Super found in this system obviously has 16 gig of GDDR6X memory. This one has a base clock speed of 2,295 MHz and a boost clock speed of 2,610 MHz. It's got dual BIOS via a switch on the side. The two options are silent or gaming. And everything you're going to see throughout this video was tested and recorded using the silent setting, as that's how it was delivered to me from CyberPower, and I like to leave everything as it is out of the box as much as I can for these reviews. And what's more, the boost clock speed is the same in either setting anyway. MSI lists the power consumption of this card as 320 watts on their website. Moving on to speak about memory then, that comes in the form of a dual channel 32GB kit of Kingston Fury Beast RGB DDR5, and that's running at 6,000 megatransfers. Nice and fast memory, as I sometimes moan about memory speed in my pre-built reviews, and I'm pleased to see 6,000 megatransfers this time around. Storing all of your important work data, like your Steam library, is a Western Digital SN850X 2TB M.2 NVMe SSD. This is a PCI Gen 4 drive, and testing it with Crystal Disk Mark resulted in read speeds of roughly 7,300 megabytes per second, and then write speeds just shy of 6,600 megabytes per second. Powering everything is an MSI MAG A850 GL 850 watt power supply. It's gold rated, it's fully modular, and it's perfectly capable of handling this sort of spec and this system. Keeping the CPU cool is a CyberPowerPC branded Master Liquid Light 360 ARGB AIO. That's a rebranded Cooler Master model, but as you can see, it's got the CyberPower branding on it, and we'll look at temperatures and stuff of the CPU later just to see how well that performs with the Ryzen processor. And then housing everything I just mentioned is this NZXT H6 Flow RGB case in black. Now, this is the first time I've seen this case in person, I believe. I may have seen it at Computex, I can't remember, it's been that long now. And I've got to say, I love it. It comes with 3 RGB fans installed as intake on the kind of front/side angled panel, and then a single 120mm fan at the back working in tandem with the radiator fans as exhaust. And I think that angled section for the intake fans at the front looks really smart, and it sets this case apart from the usual cuboid glass boxes that we see nowadays. The front I/O of the case is along the bottom edge. There's a headphone/mic combo jack, a pair of USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A ports, and then a single USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C port. Now, before we move on to look at the performance of the system, I've got to take a moment to talk about how this PC looks. This is a very subjective take, but I think this is the nicest looking pre-built system that I've ever reviewed. The choice of parts all complement each other nicely. I love how the graphics card protrudes past the angled section of the case and kind of sits kind of on its own. The case really presents it well, and it's definitely the centre of attention of the build, largely due to the fact that it's absolutely massive, and then the case as well. But overall, the system just looks very, very nice in my opinion. I really like it. What do you lot think? Let us know in the comments what you think of the looks of this system. Let's see if it performs as well as it looks then. If you're looking for a new chair, then you should definitely check out Booley's. I'm currently sat on their Ninja Pro gaming chair, which is one of 3 models from their gaming series alongside the Elite and the Master. So if you're looking for something new to stick in your setup that you can sit on and game and work, then I recommend definitely checking out boolies.co.uk. As always, I've not optimised or tweaked the system in any way before testing. Any meaningful way anyway. No software has been removed, not that there's any crazy amount of bloatware anyway, to be honest. All I've done is update the operating system and the graphics card driver. Everything else is as it comes from Cyberpower. Kicking the benchmarks off then with Cinebench Multicore, and the Ryzen 7 7800X3D recorded a score of 18,342 points when averaged out over 3 runs. This was achieved with the CPU package power reading around 90 watts of sustained power in hardware info, a fair bit lower than anything else on the chart. While the score doesn't place this CPU high up in those charts, in terms of comparison to the other stuff, it does highlight the power efficiency of the Ryzen chip. While running the benchmark, the clock speeds were sticking around the 4.8 GHz mark. Moving into single core performance then, and the Cinebench single core performance chart paints a similar picture. The 7800X3D sitting below the i5 13600K with a score of 1,816 points. Power efficiency isn't there to provide as much of a silver lining this time around though. The Ryzen CPU just didn't perform as well in this test when compared to some of the others in the chart. Moving on to look at performance in 3D Mark Time Spy then, and the difference in graphical performance becomes really apparent between the 4080 Super in this system and some of the other ones I've looked at, along with the old saying, you get what you pay for. That kind of becomes apparent as well. The Ultra R77 tops the charts on both GPU score and system cost when compared to those systems that I've reviewed in the past. Memory bandwidth, when measured in AIDA64, came out at 79,583 megabytes per second write speeds and 58,716 megabytes per second read speeds. And then the final synthetic benchmark before we move on to gaming is PC Mark 10. Expectedly, the content creation score is miles ahead of everything else due to the 4080 Super, coming in at 16,780 points. Productivity reached a score of 11,173 points. Essentials came out 11,745 points. And then the PC Mark 10 overall score was recorded at 9,325 points. Now let's move on to the gaming benchmarks. This system's configuration is without a doubt optimised for gaming. So if this system is going to shine somewhere, then it's going to be in its gaming performance. Kicking things off with Cyberpunk 2077 then, and at 1440p we saw average FPS readings of 111.8 with a 1% low of 83.6, while kicking things up to 4K is always demanding in this game, and it saw that average FPS figure drop down to 50.8 with a 1% low of 40.1. Moving on to Assassin's Creed Mirage, and this one was performing a little better. At 1440p we saw average FPS readings of 148.9 with a 1% low of 107.9, while at 4K that dropped down to 96.5 average FPS and a 77.31% low. Company of Heroes then, the only kind of real-time strategy game that I've got on the list, and at 1440p we saw a whopping 231.1 FPS with a 1% low of 159.8, while at 4K that still maintained a pretty impressive 147.2 with a 1% low of 107.3. Moving into Shadow of the Tomb Raider then, and at 1440p we saw 222.6 average FPS with a 1% low of 179.5, while at 4K that figure was 125.3 average FPS with a 1% low of 108.7. Moving on to F123 then, and this one does have ray tracing on as you can't turn it off in the settings, and the average FPS figure at 1440p was 121 on the dot with a 1% low of 99.6, while at 4K that dropped down but still did stick over the 60 FPS mark at 65.6 average with a 1% low of 56.1. The other racing game in our benchmarks then is Forza Motorsport, and at 1440p we saw average FPS figures of 135 with 1% low readings of 110.4, while at 4K that figure dropped down a bit to 100.8 average FPS with a 1% low of 86.9. Hogwarts Legacy then, and at 1440p that was 122.1 average FPS with a 1% low of 63.9, while at 4K that maintained 60 plus FPS as well with an average FPS of 66.8 and a 1% low of 39.8. The Witcher 3 then, still quite a demanding title, and at 1440p I saw average FPS readings of 104.9 with 1% low reading of 83.3. And then at 4K that dipped just below 60 to 56.3 on average with a 1% low of 47.8. A Plague Tale Requiem then, and this one at 1440p was 104.8 average with a 90.61% low. And then at 4K, very nearly maintained 60 on average with a 59.8 average FPS and a 1% low of 53.9. And finally, Starfield, the last title in my gaming benchmarks. At 1440p, I saw average FPS figures of 81.8 with a 1% low of 64.9. And then at 4K, this one was also sub 60 FPS with an average FPS of 55.1 and a 1% low of 45.7. And finally, the 10 game average readings over all of the games that I benchmarked to give you a better overall picture of the gaming performance of this system. At 1440p I saw average FPS of 138.4 and a 1% low of 104.4, while at 4K a really impressive figure of 82.4 with a 1% low of 66.4. And in the final section of charts we'll move on to look at the thermals, noise and power usage. Starting off with the CPU package power, at idle this was measured at 33 watts in hardware info. And then in Cinebench that spiked up to 90 watts, while in Cyberpunk 2077 I saw a reading of 71 watts. And that CPU was putting out the following temperatures while being cooled by the AIO. In idle I saw temperatures of 41 degrees, in Cinebench I saw that go up to 83 degrees peak, and then in Cyberpunk over a 30-minute benchmark was 70 degrees. And GPU temps then, and these were measured during a Cyberpunk 2077 30-minute stress test with an ambient temperature of around 18 degrees in my office. The GPU hit 65 degrees in hardware info. The hotspot reading topped out at 75 degrees, while the GPU memory read 64 degrees. System noise then, at idle, I measured the system at 36 decibels. In Cinebench that jumped up quite substantially to 54 decibels, and then in Cyberpunk I saw it around 41 decibels. It's not the quietest system I've ever used. The fans were noticeably loud during a Cinebench run. Here's a little clip so you can hear just what the different sound profiles when you're doing different tasks sound like. And if I have to boost the audio in editing in post, I'll drop a little note at the bottom of the screen. If you don't see a note, then I haven't done it. This is straight from my microphone. Finally then, the total system power measured at the wall socket at idle was 90 watts, in Cinebench was 180 watts, and then when the GPU started ramping up and doing its thing in Cyberpunk, I saw that reading jump up to a pretty hefty 437 watts. So then, the Ultra R77 RTX is a monster gaming machine. It was always going to be with the pairing of the 7800 X3D and a 4080 Super. If my memory serves me correctly, it's the first machine I've reviewed that maintained an average FPS of above 60 across all 10 games that I've tested at 4K. The spec is well balanced, I feel, and it'll perform well, whatever you want to play, considering if what you're playing is optimized well, that is. Aesthetically, it's a very, very, very nice build in my opinion. The case and the lighting are great. All of the parts kind of suit each other well. Pricing wise, I spec'd up almost an identical system on PC Part Picker, minus the operating system license, and it came out at £2,061, so a little bit under 250 quid cheaper than having it pre-built by CyberPowerPC. And when you factor in the gold warranty that's included and the cost of then obtaining a genuine Windows license, it's not a bad deal in my opinion. Overall, a very, very solid gaming system that I'm struggling to pick out a fault with. CyberPowerPC have done a good job in building a system that performs just as well as it looks. And that's the end of the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave me a like down below if you did. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep up with the latest PC gaming news and reviews. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. If you go down below the video, you'll find links to our merch store, like this t-shirt that I'm wearing, and then links to our Discord server, our Patreon page, and our website. If you want to check any of that out, on the website there'll be a written review of this thing as well. Anyway guys, I've been Matt. This has been the Ultra R77 RTX gaming desktop from CyberPowerPC. I will speak to you in the next one. Look after yourselves. See you later.